This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
We will call this meeting to order. Welcome to the February 17th, 2020 meeting of the Eau Claire Plan Commission. This meeting is being broadcast live by Valley Media Works on Charter Channel 994 WRFP-LP 101.9 FM and online at valleymediaworks.org. The Plan Commission attempts to conduct its public hearings in a relatively informal manner within the constraint that we must deal with the issues before us in an orderly and businesslike fashion. We give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, and then others, either for or against a proposal, are each permitted to speak once. We do request that everyone restrict their comments to the issues before us, avoid unnecessary repetition, and be prudent in the use of time. We want to make sure that we have adequate time to review and discuss all items with equal diligence. Please remember to turn your cell phones off or to silent during the meeting today. And if you do plan to speak, please pick up one of those gold pieces of paper in the back, fill it out, and hand it to Mr. Petrie up in the front when you speak, and then give us your name and address. We have a short agenda tonight, but a lot to talk about. There's only one item for public hearing, and then we have discussion and direction. So with that, we'll begin the meeting with item number 1, a public hearing for recommendation to City Council on the Renewable Energy Action Plan. Mr. Noel.
Good evening, Plan Commission. Back before you, per your direction to hold the public hearing on the Renewable Energy Action Plan. And you have this item in your packet with the links to the updated plans. So hopefully you got through all that material, the 300 pages or so. So it's quite dense, and we've arrived after a year of work. And so just to give you, I'm not going to go through everything like I did 2 weeks ago, but just for the public as well, to give, if we can get this going, there we go, just for the general audience too, to give a little context. So back in 2018, the City Council passed these goals, the 20% or the by 2050 goal of 100% renewable energy and carbon neutrality by 2050, so 30 years away. And the next step was to develop a plan, and that's what we have before us. And then implementation, then monitor and adjust will be what we need to do thereafter. Before the council passed those goals, they wanted to gauge the pulse of the community. About 3 out of 4 of the folks in the town, in the city, said that it was important to them to set these type of goals. And so that gave the council more confidence in terms of making this policy decision, these goals. The package, the suite, if you will, of deliverables, we have 4 plans. The master plan is the Renewable Energy Action Plan. Then we have these sub-action plans that really work towards implementation. So they're more detailed. You typically don't see this in a comp plan type document, but we were able to secure a healthy amount of funding to be able to do those extra plans. And we've got the electric vehicle roadmap, and then the net zero energy building guide, and a smaller guide that focuses on solar ready buildings. And as you saw last time, a nice concise executive summary that pretty much boils it all down for the general reader in terms of what they can do in the different impact areas, the 5 areas indicated with those icons, and then a little bit more of the actual modeling and data behind the plan on the back page. As mentioned, we had a robust public steering committee, and some of those members are out here in the audience. And also want to recognize the commissioners, Obaid and Grand Lund, for your support in the development phase of this plan. We had 5 workshops from May to November of last year. And so that input really helped form the REAP plan, but then also those ideas and themes are threaded into the sub-action plans as well. So hopefully you saw that consistency. Again, what is the REAP structure? We have the master plan, and then we have the 5 areas focusing on buildings. So looking at commercial, residential, industrial institutions, and then transportation, waste, and biodiversity sections as well form the policies. And then these detailed action plans, the net zero energy guide and the electric vehicle roadmap. So again, the committee came up with this vision statement that the plan will be guided by evidence-based information, transparent process, equitable, inclusive to meet the goals. And then also that as they recognize that these are going to take a lot of efforts over time, will strengthen our leadership in sustainability and renewable energy for generations to come. Also, they dived into 3 key principal areas: equity and inclusiveness, economic development to leverage this plan for, say, more clean energy jobs, and then ecosystem stewardship of our natural resources. So as I showed this before, this is basically the framework of the REAP plan. We have the 6 sectors for 68 strategies. And a lot of these strategies, as I've mentioned, look to empower and educate and promote. There's some policies in there as well, but it's really trying to work with the community and develop partnerships as we go forth and do, say, renewable energy projects. And each strategy, it's a 10-year plan, really focus on the near-term 10-year plan with a goal and a metric to monitor that progress over the 10 years. And then these critical pathways. And the critical pathways, as I'll note in a future slide, are really what we modeled to see how we could get there, to get to that carbon neutral goal. And then also the renewable energy section talks about where we're at with the renewable energy goal. And then there's an implementation section with a detailed work plan that basically directs staff and other partners in the community in terms of what projects we should do. And then deeper into the document in Appendix A, there's tactics, and that's really trying to focus on actions, about the who, what, where, when, and things like that. And then long-term initiatives, things that we may not have a clear picture on today, but we know we're going to need some different technology breakthroughs when it comes to, for example, heating, industrial processes, and vehicles. So one example, just to pull out, as I did before, was the residential strategy. And this was looking at having 200 houses convert to all renewable electricity, so that portion of their bill to go renewable. They could do that whether it's on-site solar systems or purchasing solar through, say, Xcel Energy, or if they're on the electric co-op through their program. And this looked also at a metric, so 425,000 kilowatts per year is what that actually would equal. So we can measure that, and we can easily track this by our permits and inspections division. The implementation plan notes this particular strategy and details in about using different things like the solar guide, as I had mentioned, that we have as a product as part of this package, and to use different solar calculators that exist, whether it's through the Federal Department of Energy or things that we might create in the future. And then in the tactics section, looking at some of the things that we want to try to do to keep the marketplace favorable for solar is keep permit fees low and the zoning not cumbersome. So with that, just to note, all of our data has been verified since our last meeting to make sure that we've got everything correct and updated for publication purposes. And it's interesting to note that we've not really gone anywhere in terms of carbon reductions the last 4 years that we've measured. There's always a lag time in this data, so we're working on 2019 data already, but it takes a while to gather this information. And that's typical, even if it's the Federal Energy Information Agency. So it takes a while to gather all this data, but we really haven't made a lot of progress when it comes to our carbon footprint. So looking at decreasing these sectors, and so we break them out. They're pretty consistent. In terms of the critical pathways, or the jargon is mitigation, in terms of reducing carbon emissions. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but we basically have them in key areas: residential, commercial, transportation, and then the grid decarbonization that will come from our utilities like Xcel. And so we've been able to assign values, unit reductions in terms of the energy unit, and then therefore we can calculate the carbon reductions. And what that looks like with all of those different pathways modeled, again, they're assumptions. with a 1% growth rate, we can see that if you look at the 600,000 bar, that is basically where our 30% goal is. And you can see that if all assumptions hold true, by 2030, we would be at basically a 30% drop. So we've overshot it a little bit, which is good because you don't know the future. And so we think that it's doable, but again, it remains to be seen until that day comes. And then renewable energy is even harder in the sense of where the community is at. So we have 6% of total energy is actually renewable energy. So that combines all of our diesel, gasoline, electricity, natural gas, and looking at what portion is actually renewable, it's only 6%. By 2030, we get bumped up to 10% more. Most of that would be coming from more renewables put on the electric grid. So wind farms and things like that, solar farms. So that is basically the REAP plan in terms of where we're at and where we want to go by 2030. And again, the sub-action plans look at trying to promote the industry and to accelerate it when it comes to solar or energy efficiency in our buildings. And so what's highlighted here are these strategies, again, pulled from the REAP plan right into the Net Zero Energy Guide. And so our next step with this, pending approval, would be to go to the Home Builders Association. We've been working with them, and to do a training to help our builders and architects and other interested people to learn what it is, how to do it, not necessarily be net zero energy from day one, but to be ready so that maybe a building can be there in time. Because we know that these strategies do cost. They're not as cheap as they'll get there, but it's going to take some time. Oh, I should note, what we did add on this is a strategy checklist, and there's a hyperlink there. I just have one screenshot that a user could actually quickly, it's a 4-page checklist, could look at all the strategies, check, I've got this, I don't have this, and this can help them to understand what they're doing, and also a place for some additional strategies if they have something. So we developed that try to help ease the lengthy document, which is 140 pages. And then the Solar Ready Guide, we improved this from your last review of it. We tried to make it more localized. It was a little more general. And so we added some more local Eau Claire photos of solar systems, some maps that show solar access amongst the city, and updated the codes as well to make sure all that's relevant. And we also put a disclaimer on the guide to say that this will not guarantee that your project will pass building inspections. You must follow code. So we add a disclaimer on there as well. EV roadmap, again, no changes here from your last meeting, but just to remind everybody, the community goal is looking at 10% of, I should have that up there, 10% of total vehicles registered, which actually equates to 8,000 vehicles on the road by 2030 of electric vehicles. The city, our municipal staff, when we looked at what we should be doing, we wanted to do a 15% goal, or about 55 vehicles by 2030. And then also the infrastructure to support that, whether the city gets involved and has infrastructure charging stations or workplace charging, retail charging, various places. We figure very modest approach of 160 public chargers, which is basically one charger for 50 vehicles. So that ratio is quite modest compared to, say, California, which is about 1 to 36. This just details that plan, trend lines over time on the municipal fleet. Just a few vehicles each year, ramping up a little bit more towards 2030. And then also here's the community 10%. And the way we modeled this was vehicle miles traveled. So basically taking fossil fuel vehicles and switching them out to be EVs. And so that 10% VMT model would roughly mean 8,000 vehicles running on electricity. And so the Plan Commission has to find consistency with the comp plan. In your packet, you have your resolution that states a couple of the different connectors back to our plan. And so we have the comprehensive plan sustainability chapter, which talks about carbon neutral all the way back to 2009 when it was first passed. And the health chapter talks about forming a climate action plan, which is what the REAP plan is. And also things with our waterways plan, looking at ecological studies. The biodiversity index is something that's different, but it's called out. And the waterways plan talked about, especially along our waterways, to look at the sensitive ecological assets that we have there and to protect them, to catalog them, and to continue to protect them and enhance them. So though there's some direct linkages back to the consistency with the comp plan, also the REAP plan notes about a compact development strategy so that people don't have to drive as much. They can walk, they can bike. And so when you look at the major themes of the comp plan, obviously we want to be a city that thrives. These goals and the REAP plan will help the quality of life in our community, and they will help us to hopefully have a growing job sector when it comes to clean energy and those that are trying to do work in this space, compact development, redevelopment, economic development as well, and then environmental stewardship. So the staff, we have found consistency with the comp plan, and I'm here for any more questions about the plan, comments or concerns, and then there's a public hearing and your consideration for adopting this as an element of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Nice work. Are there questions or comments from the commission? Wow. See how well you covered it? Nice work. Thank you. This is a public hearing. Are there members of the public who came to speak on this topic? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Brian Larson. I'm a member of the Sustainability Advisory Committee, and we hope that you recommend approval of the Renewable Energy Action Plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who came to speak on the Renewable Energy Action Plan? All right, I see none. Is there a motion on the commission?
I'll move to approve.
Commissioner Obaid, go ahead.
I'll move to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Wolfgram. Thank you. Are there any comments? Any discussion?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I would like to make a comment. I mean, this is just makes a person mentally numb because it's so well thought out. It's very comprehensive, but it really takes us to a place that's almost difficult to imagine. So I'm sure there's questions that I would have, but I'm so impressed with the depth and breadth of the report. I'm just proud of our city.
I am too. I don't understand everything that's in here, but I know that we're starting a long path towards something that's going to be very valuable for the city and for our environment. So I want to thank the commissioners who served on the committee. That's why I was happy to have Commissioner Obaid make the motion to approve. So with that, if there's no other discussions, we will call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Well done, thank you. So we'll move on to discussion and direction, starting with the downtown parking study. Ms. Ness.
Good evening. Tonight I'm going to give just kind of a general overview of the 2019 Comprehensive Parking Study. It's an update to the 2014 parking study that was really a downtown study completed 5 years ago. It it looked at North Barstow and South Barstow business districts. The study that was done or has been completed in 2019 added the Third Ward neighborhood area and the historic Randall Park neighborhood areas. WGI was the consultant that was hired to do the parking study for the city. In the spring of 2019, there were public meetings held with the neighborhoods and the business associations, and a public survey was taken by citizens and businesses and people visiting our community even. That information was all analyzed and put into this parking study document that will be taken to council at the end of March 23rd and 24th. Ooh. Thank you. As I had mentioned, there's 3 areas. I apologize that these are kind of small, but the downtown Riverfront District is the area that I'll focus on mostly tonight for the examples and the detailed analysis that was done within the report. Each of the areas, public and private parking lots were counted, and then on-street stalls were counted for the parking occupancy for supply and demand analysis. So in the downtown area, this is an example of a heat map that was put together for us. City staff did the data collection and provided it to the consultants. The heat map really shows us the percentages of parking lots and on-street parking. So the table 4 on the right-hand side shows the public, private parking lots, the city parking lots, and the on-street, and gives the percent occupied during the weekday peak time frame. That's what's corresponding to the map on the left-hand side. And that shows approximately 45% of the stalls are occupied. But if you look at the map on the left-hand side, the heat map, it shows that there's some areas that are higher parked than other areas. They're a little more desirable. The demand to park in front of those businesses or within that area is greater. So typically, in the parking industry, a parking lot or a street curbside is considered to be at capacity if it's at 85% or greater. That's indicated by the red shown on the map. So there's a couple block faces in the downtown area that are at capacity. The yellow is nearing capacity, and that's something that we need to keep our eye on. This gives us an indication of there may be a need to change the parking restrictions in this area to even this out a little more. There may be some strategies that we can use in these higher density or higher demand areas to promote turnover, greater turnover for the parking, and allow more stalls to be parked more frequently. The table 7 underneath shows the time frames on a Friday evening when parking stalls were counted. And you can see that the occupancy of the areas were lower, but again, the heat map would show that there still are some areas that are considered at capacity for parking on Friday evenings. The parking supply and demand was looked at by WGI for existing and future, and this is in the downtown Riverfront District, the area that we were just looking at. Based on the zoning code, the total number of parking required was calculated for the downtown area. You can see it was based on types of building use. We have the retail, office, library, the Pablo Center for existing building uses. And then on the right-hand side, there's a table that shows a utilization factor. At any time throughout the day or with the different uses of these buildings, there's not going to be 100% of everyone at every business at one time. So that's really what the utilization factor is taking into consideration, that at, let's say, one of the office buildings, there's going to be sick employees. There's going to be employees working off-site. There's going to be people on vacation. So those utilization factors are shown on the right-hand side. Those are the industry standards that the consultant provided, and then that develops the daytime peak utilization that is in the right-hand side of that table 9, showing that the total required parking based on the ordinance would be 5,428. But when you incorporate those utilization factors, it's 4,369. Our off-street inventory in this area is 3,227, which leaves us with a deficit of 1,142 parking stalls. And that's where the on-street and other private lots come into play to help those additional vehicles being parked. When we looked at the future demand and supply, we increased the amount of retail, office, and library. The Pablo Center stayed the same, and we added a convention center and hotel potentially to the downtown area. That increased both the required parking stall by zoning code, and that's based off of our existing zoning code. And then also similarly with that utilization factor, the parking rate was increased from what it currently is. The off-street inventory also increased, and that's following the guidelines that those new buildings would meet the parking minimums that are required by them. So the off-street inventory goes up to 4,422. The daytime utilization is just over 5,000, but we still have a deficit of 641 parking stalls. So knowing that information and the existing parking ratios and the existing demand in the downtown area, we can look at that and it will help us move forward on determining if we need more parking and if so, in what areas. And one of the other tools that the consultant has given us to use is this user comfort factor approach. And it's a standard within the parking industry. I'll give you an example of the walking distance design standard, but it really categorizes and gives zones for user comfort factor. So the lower the number, the not as friendly it is, I would say. So the UCF1 is considered poor, that less than 50% of the patrons would be satisfied with where they're parking and the amount of distance that they have to walk. And when you get into an acceptable, half the patrons would be willing to walk that distance. And then you go up to UCF of 4, and that's excellent. 90% of the patrons would be satisfied with that. And then it gives climate control, or the weather conditions. The weather plays a big factor in how far individuals want to walk when they're parking, especially in our climate. So it gives us kind of those factors that we can look at and radii for the walking distances corresponding to the user comfort factors. This is an example of what the user comfort factor for the Farwell-Gibson ramp would be with the UCF1, the outer ring of the circle being the least friendly and the furthest walking distance, which is about 1,600 feet. So And then as you get closer to the ramp, it becomes more desirable for the walking distance. They also put together the walking distance for the newer parking structure located in the North Barstow Business District. And that having this tool will help us look at when the Farwell-Gibson ramp is coming to its life end. Do we replace in kind at the same location, or do we use multiple different structures in multiple locations, and helping us find and look at the user comfort factors related to those locations and those types of facilities and how large they'd be. The consultant suggested using this overlaid with the heat maps that they provided as well, and kind of collecting that data on a yearly basis so we can see where the changes are and where the demand is growing and where it's decreasing, and that should help us as well moving forward. So overall, the summary and findings, the recommendations provided by WGI were really related to customer service experience. They categorized them into customer service experience, technology, policies and management, and managing the supply. And I'd say the customer service experience, really the parking industry today, when people are going to visit a new city, a lot of times they're looking up where they are going to park before they go to that location, seeing if they're going to event, if there's event parking, if they need to pay for that, if they can reserve it in advance. And there's just so much technology out there related to the parking industry and how we can move that forward within our city. So they give us some ideas on really having the customer service be the driver of determining what type of technology we implement into the city for parking. Looking at the policies, I just wanted to outline one of the points that was made in the report that is specific to Plan Commission, and that's looking at the parking ratios and the minimum parking requirements for buildings for businesses. And then managing the supply, that's really, again, related to the technology and the customer service and the curbside demand, and being able to have the data to base the parking decisions on and how to move forward and manage that supply. The recommendations really focus on strategic planning, technology, and marketing and communications. And again, right now, if you go to our website, you find parking in multiple different departments. They really focus on bring that message to one location, get a good branding for your parking program and a consistent naming convention, better signage, better marketing, things along those lines. So, and then our technology will be able to play into that, and they give us some ideas on different types of technologies and the benefits and the positives related to different types of technologies. So with that, if you have any questions on the parking study, I'd be willing to answer.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
With either table 9 or 10, your choice.
Okay.
With the second column with parking requirement per zoning ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And below that you have supply, or next to it you have supply versus demand. You talk about demand or required in the table 9, but the chart below says demand. Is that really the required, the yellow stripe?
That's what's by the zoning code.
But it's listed as required in table 9, and then when you do the yellow stripe below, you list it as demand.
Correct. So maybe it's a table, or a heading on the table that needs to get
Yeah,
get
because
changed.
it really should be what's required.
Yep.
Per zoning, as
Yep.
opposed to demand.
Yeah.
And then I noticed in going through the sheets we got, there's some real gaps in table numbers. Are there some missing, or?
Yes, I just pulled for the downtown area tonight to focus on where the majority of the items related to the parking zoning requirements would be.
Does a lot of the data go back to the parking survey that they did a while back online? Because there were some real flaws in that.
There, it's referenced, but yes, they noted when the study or the survey was placed, we were working with a different project manager.
Yeah.
And the new project manager that came in said, we have the information, we'll include it in the report, but we're not going to weigh our decisions on, we're not putting all of our weight into that survey. We will report some of the numbers that we received from the survey. So it is incorporated into the study,
Did
but
they do a new survey? Do you
no,
know?
a new survey was not taken, no.
Because the old one, there was some real skewed questions in there that I think misled people that were responding to the questionnaire.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know how good that data is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my opinion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the commission? I have one. The parking ramp across the street from us over here has been under renovation for quite some time.
Correct.
What work still needs to be done on that, and do you know, is there a projected date?
Projected ending.
Right.
We, so the repairs that were being done were really structural repairs. We were looking at the tendons, it's a post-tension structure. And so we did some repairs to those, and they're actually just finishing up with those repairs now. I'd say in March, the construction should be complete, is our
Okay.
anticipation. We ran into a couple snags along the way, found more issues than we knew about as we were doing some exploring with the construction, and then getting the right parts and cold weather and having to
Right.
heat the concrete, and it just ended up taking a little bit longer than anticipated.
What's the projected life of that parking ramp?
Those improvements should extend its life 5 to 10 years.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Brennell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Ness, for the good work that's been done on this. Question, did the consultants look at, and the survey look at cost of parking versus distance people would go and take those things into account at all?
They did not look specific at cost versus distance for us, but they did give us general guidelines. And depending on the type of technology that you're using, that plays into the cost of the parking. If we go into looking at metering or pay stations or pay by phone, that all incorporates into the fee that needs to be charged to operate those types of systems as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Christopherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how are we going to be using this particular information from the parking study? It seems to me that there's a good deal of consumer education and persuasion to use their automobiles and parking in a different way for us to be able to manage the cost of increased parking, to manage the way that parking increases the cost of construction, both residential and commercial. So in receiving this, it's all very interesting, but how are we going to, as a commission and as a council, put this into our ordinances? What's our strategy?
think that's actually one of the next items that Ryan's going to discuss further.
Okay, any more questions? All right,
Perfectly.
thank you very much. Good work. And we move on to parking standards. Mr. Petrie.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellent question. We're here to talk about it. Parking standards. This is always a fun topic. It's about as fun as signs to some people. The 2020 work program for this commission is looking at parking study, parking standards within the downtown. They also mentioned that to affordable housing. And then this commission also asked to look at the parking standards for commercial buildings. So this is used as for a guide for new development and redevelopment and infill development by this commission, by staff, by developers, property owners, and everyone alike. So we're here to talk about that tonight. Currently in the downtown, so central business zoning, Water Street would be included in that. We do allow a reduction, 10% for a transit, and then you get a 5% for bicycle parking. In 2016, this commission, along with the city council, did change the parking requirements for multifamily. We went from 1.5 stalls for 2 bedrooms and 2 stalls for 3 bedrooms, and we simplified it and went to 1 bed or 1 parking spot per bed. That was approved. So we're not looking at multifamily potentially. We are looking at housing within the downtown that could either be affordable housing or just market rate housing in the central business. For example, just to give you some numbers, this commission, along with the city council for the Cannery District apartments, which are under construction across from the brewing project, first phase and second phase is a 24% reduction. So what that means is we gave them a 10% for transit and 5% for bike, and then this commission, along with the council, gave another additional 11% or 9% off. So that's 24%. They did a parking study within the development, and staff agreed with the developer, along with this commission and council, to give them a reduction. So that's for a portion of that was phase 2, is my understanding, is affordable housing. Phase 1 was market rate. So with that being said, I also included in your packet the current standards of today. Now, looking at the broader picture of parking, we do have some standards that are used for any new development. So we were going to walk through which standards would be changed, and we also would like to talk about parking problems, not within just downtown, but in general. I did a city staff survey, went around City Hall one day and asked, where do you have a problem with parking in Eau Claire? It was a kind of a fun survey. The number 1 parking problem, as you may have experienced, is Starbucks on Hastings Way. Now that has a couple issues with it. The drive-through is right off the entrance, which makes it really difficult to get in if you're not going through the drive-through. Also, the capacity and the amount of people that are visiting that site during peak demand is a problem. The number 2 problem that the staff came up with is the Milwaukee Burger Company on Claremont Avenue. Again, a problem with that one is they have plus or minus 20 to 25 employees, and typically employees have 1 car per person. So those are the 2 biggest. The only third problem that came up from city staff was the festival foods on Mall Drive, and that's during peak demand. And they were mentioning during Saturdays and Sundays that the parking lot does get pretty full. Those are the only ones that they could think about, city staff-wise. The planning staff did mention there's a few other ones, but they're not huge problems. So those would be the commercial sites. Within the downtown, as Ms. Ness noted, there was no city staff had any problems. They did mention City Hall parking lot, but that's different too. So with that all being said, we're here tonight just to get some direction, to have a conversation about parking. Give us some feedback, what you would like to see, what you'd like to not see. Overall, as a community though, I would say most of the commercial businesses are probably way overparked. For example, Sam's Club, Walmart, Target. You go to the mall, there's way too much parking everywhere. Why is that? Because the commercial tenants and corporations wanted a lot of parking. If you go there on Black Friday or the weekend before Christmas, they may be, 60 to 70% full, but most of the time they're about 40% full, plus or minus, depending on the location, obviously. And we're just talking about our city in Eau Claire. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Allen is here. I'm here. Ms. Ness is here. We are looking at some guidance. We also might be looking at some parking standards, like setback standards. We don't have that currently. Also, we would want to be looking at winter mission for snow storage, which is a big thing within this community. If you remember last year, most commercial businesses had to move their snow somewhere else. Otherwise, they were taking up, 50 to 75 stalls within their parking lot. So we just want to get some feedback, have a conversation, and we're here for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. So you're looking for some direction on where?
Yes, preferably something.
Okay, good. Commissioner Peterson?
I have one. I don't do Starbucks. I brew my own coffee at home, fresh ground. But I think it's probably unique during a half hour or 45-minute period every morning, where the rest of the time they probably have more parking than they actually need and more circulation than they actually need. So I think it's a unique situation there. And I think with Milwaukee Burger Company, or one thing I've noticed with Red Lobster this year, with their snow plowing, with Shopko going out, I think there's a different plowing provider, and their parking lot capacity has gone down significantly because they're piling it in the parking spots. So you can still find room to get in there, but I think it's a lot of it's internal operations on how your snowplow operator operates it, and with Milwaukee, and the same with Milwaukee Burger Company and Red Lobster, and I think with maybe Olive Garden, where they have a plethora of employees. They've got 4 or 5 hosts or hostesses and multiple waiters and waitresses and cooking staff that they do have a lot of employees. And so I'm sure most of them are instructed to park away from the building so the customers can park nearby. But I think they have unique problems too with the service industry.
True.
Mr. Christopherson?
Thank you. I would really be in favor of some intense face-to-face or one-on-one or small group conversations with people that live near downtown to get some sense. For instance, the information that you presented talked about the 1, 2, 3, 4 customer service, and actually the 1 wasn't that far away. But if you're trying to change somebody's perception of what's convenient, I think Eau Claire is really still right in front of the door. And that's not affordable anymore. So I think maybe we want to even discover what are grades of kind of like the REAP. Where do we want to be by 2030? Because I think everybody's going to feel the cost of the parking and the cost of the driving. But my last comment would also be our public transit is so, it's a good attempt at basic service, but it's not very functional if you really want it to meet your needs for errands or appointments, because the pickup isn't frequent enough. So there's several components here that they would be converging on the same way, but I would like to see us moving in the direction of sharing the cost of parking across the board, and not trying to continue to make parking free or extremely convenient.
Interesting point. I would just like to share, if you ever go on Google Maps, you can measure and how far you walk. So if you ever go to the mall or Walmart, Target, you're walking farther than 2 city blocks. And in downtown, nobody walks 2 city blocks. It's just the mindset. But you're walking from your car to the front door at a big box store, and you're walking farther than 2 blocks in your downtown core area.
Mr. Granlund.
I've had several projects in other municipalities where there were specific snow retention requirements. I think that I would really like to see that that is part of our continuing issue with site plans, is to be sure of what's happening with that. I think at the minimum, we should consider there could be an allowance factor given for a site that develops more snow retention that's non-paved as an allowance against their parking requirement. And of course, that would go hand in hand with any kind of a parking study that's already one of those overriding factors we allow for. Our discussion of the residential parking, it really came down to the fact that it's difficult math. If you try to use a fraction of a parcel or a fraction of a car for certain numbers of persons, and I think it does make a lot of difference to keep the math simple throughout this chart, but then make sure that we always clarify with the applicant that they have that opportunity to do a study, and then they may be able to do some, like I say, we'll have to look at what the parcel or the percentages can be for incorporating the snow retention at some point. I know the following paragraphs here also indicate the extent to which parking can be remote from the site if there's an agreement. And I think that if there's, you may be within X number of feet, and I think it's just a single number. And I think that with the use numbers you had, that we might break that down further, so that if there were the trade-off for more parking farther away or less parking closer to the door, it could be incorporated into those adjacency categories. And then that would also allow for multiple landowners to develop some common elements, whether it might be a covered walkway that took part in several adjacent parcels, or I think it would help a lot at Hastings Starbucks if they had an agreement with the tenant or the parcel on the south side to cross over that way instead of straight off the street. And I think that those, again, that gets to be a more complicated issue with the adjacencies and the agreements. But we've gone further with the downtown parking in requiring there to be a formal agreement where it used to be a handshake. And I think that extending that kind of formality to other situations is not out of the question.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
I agree with Gregory on this. Just Starbucks, for instance, there's the Burger Place, which is where the old White House used to be. Their peak hours are probably lunchtime and evening, where Starbucks is the morning. Now, I don't know their proximity to each other since I don't do Starbucks, but you could share something like that. Another example would be the Postal Service on Madison Avenue and Stella Blues and Stella Red. Whether you could park in the post office parking lot to go to Stella Blues and Red during the evening, because that's probably more geared towards the evening hours, where the Postal Service is pretty much done for at 5 o'clock each day. So there are some shared agreements that I think you could set up depending on, if it's an office building and a supper club, their hours are going to be different. They could share back and forth. And that would get to your special study on reducing parking requirements too. So I agree with Mr. Granlund on that 100%.
Do we want to touch base on housing in the downtown as well? I know we're mostly focused on, now we're getting into mixed use now, but we might want to talk just a little bit about housing within the downtown and if we would potentially see another reduction for affordable housing or for just any kind of housing across the board. Now, I would clarify that that would have to probably be within a zone. So with zoning within CBD, that's typically what we've done in the past. I don't know. Right now, you get a 15% reduction. If you want to talk about it, like another 10% reduction, or what would the commission prefer to see? Or just have a little conversation about that as well.
That's actually a topic that I had in mind to comment on, because a while back, we approved a site plan for housing development on Oxford Avenue that included some low-income or affordable housing, and we reduced the parking requirements kind of significantly for that plan because, as the theory goes, the people that are marketed for this particular kind of housing don't use vehicles as much as upper or middle income folks. So perhaps that's something you can work into the discussion about, parking requirements moving forward. And but the catch, I think, is that I don't think we have a very good definition yet. We haven't really put a good definition on what affordable housing actually is. I think it was 30% of the average median income, including utilities, but then that kind of begs the question, what is our average median income, and how do you determine that? How often do you recalculate, and so on? So if we're going to have an ordinance that reduces parking requirements for low-income housing, then I think that issue needs to be resolved with a little more clarity.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, I did mention the Cannery District Apartments. That's the one I was talking about, the phase one and phase two.
Yep.
We did reduce it down by 24% total, so it'd have been a 9% additional reduction by this commission and council. So it was a total of 24% off the required parking.
Good, thank you. And then in this material that was given to us by Mr. Allen, the zoning practice article, it talks about, and Commissioner Gregert, who wasn't here tonight, as all of us know, sent an email talking about completely or reducing or potentially entirely eliminating off-street parking requirements. So I know that's something that you'll be talking about going forward. And this article talks about removing off-street parking requirements. Personally, I'm very open to reducing them, but I think there are some places where they are more necessary than others. And the one that I think of is in the historic Randall Park neighborhood, where parking has been a perennial issue there for a long, long time. And one of the things that we did to help with that is have off-street parking requirements for rooming houses, which there are a number of in that neighborhood. So I'd be leery of creating another problem by doing that. So. Commissioner Wolfgram.
Thank you, Chairperson Larson. So on January 27th at the public hearing at City Council, Mr. Weinzent's, it was stunning to me. I think it was stunning to many people when he was talking about underground parking on the Block 7 area, that it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it generally costs $25,000 per space.
Per stall, that's correct.
Per stall. That was stunning to me. And given that, and that's the TID 8 district, and we had, I think, a very good discussion about all of that. But given the cost of that, there was a discussion about giving cash grants to developers, but that the housing in that area, that immediate area around Block 7 and those additional 2 lots, would then need to be market rate in order to be able to not be in the red on that TID 8. And I really haven't been able to stop thinking about that exorbitant cost and just wondering, you know, in terms of parking standards to reduce cost of developing housing and subsequent demand for infrastructure, if there actually are alternatives to that underground parking, and what really would the demand be in our city for that underground parking in that area? I mean, I can assume, but I'm an evidence-based person as well. So I would like to know at some point what the demand for that underground parking there would be, given that stunning cost for our city and all the subsequent actions that we're trying to take in order to make that happen.
Excellent point.
Thank
There
you.
is 2 apartments under construction, real quick, in Altoona in River Prairie that have first floor parking. Now, I'm not sure the number of costs, but I can reach out to that developer and ask him what. So it's in a garage and it's heated, but it's not below ground. So I'll reach out to that developer and ask him what the cost was per stall.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
In talking with Dr. Wolfgram before the meeting and affordable housing and the need for parking, and with the Oxford apartments, if a developer does not need required parking for affordable housing, they don't need surface parking or garages, there in turn is a cost savings to them, which means they can produce that affordable housing. So it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, which comes first, but I think they can go hand in hand, that if the parking requirement wasn't as high, and affordable housing, renters normally don't need that extra parking, maybe it's something that could be meshed together and something that could be beneficial to both parties.
Thank you. Mr. Brenholm.
Just a comment. I'm sitting here thinking, I think it's fantastic that we're having a discussion about downtown parking. Having grown up here, I remember a time when there was a significant parking problem downtown. I also remember when there was no parking problem downtown because there was very little reason to come down here. And I think it's just, it says a lot for the progress we've made as a city and for the planning on the part of the city staff, council, and this commission to go forward and be looking at this problem and having the foresight to looking at it now. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, I know we're talking about downtown here and parking, but I think it's a whole different problem when we get to the university area.
That's
It's
correct.
at the Third Ward, and we get to Water Street and the Randall Park area. You know, and there, if you relax too much the off-street parking, they're parking on the street now. You know, and the article that Mr. Allen gave to us says, you know, there should be a few empty spaces on street parking. They ain't there, you know, especially during the day in the Third Ward area around the university, and certainly the Water Street and Randall Park area in the evening. Further away from Water Street or Chippewa, where during the day the problem seems to be more during the day because they're university students. So I think it's something that I think we need to draw the university into this too. They have an outer lot on Stein Boulevard that students park there from the dorms. There could be other external lots where they could have their students park and bus to the university in an express fashion, as opposed to having the city bus system taken there, and that might alleviate some of the parking problems in the area immediately around the university.
Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that occurs to me, I know that the study did talk about Third Ward, and they said that there should be charging for their parking on street because students will go to where it's free. They don't care where the university wants them to park. But there's other cities that are having the same issue. What is our connection with other urban centers that are trying to manage?
We've reached out to some of the comparable cities that were brought forward in the parking study. We've visited La Crosse and looked at their parking utility that they have put together. I've talked with Wausau some on how they're changing some of their approaches to their parking. But I haven't gone further than that at this point. We've been working with the university and the Third Ward neighborhood and now trying to get them connected and move forward with the parking study recommendations with those two, and then also the historic Randall Park neighborhood as well. So we'll keep working with them moving forward here and seeing what we can do to address some of their issues that have been ongoing.
May I ask a follow-up? I'm just wondering if it would expand the capacity that you have for looking at this, if there were like a task force that could engage other cities and multiply some of the interest. I continue to think about the consumer's interest in this issue, because that's where the pushback will come from after ordinance changes or policy changes have been made. So it just seems like involving the end user in looking at what's working in other communities and getting them advocating in a direction that we see meet some of the city's needs. Mm-hmm. I'm all in favor of that.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Petrie. And Mr. Allen will lead a discussion on the 5-year comprehensive plan review.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. Just to kind of tie into Ryan's presentation and Leah's as well. As you noted, Mr. Chair, that Commissioner Gregor was unable to be here tonight, but did mention, as the agenda was published last week, did reply that he was wondering how the city can best initiate a process to involve the public and developers in this conversation. And again, playing off of Commissioner Christopherson's comments as well. So beyond that, he did not provide any other additional comments at this point, but as noted, along with the comprehensive plan update, or comprehensive plan review, I should say, there'll be additional opportunities to have conversations, but certainly involving the development community and both current and proposed projects moving forward will be necessary. And the same is true as we look at a review of the comprehensive plan. Before we leave the parking discussion entirely, yes, do have the zoning practice literally came out as we're putting the agenda packet together this last week, so very good timing. Donald Shoup is in planning circles known as the kind of parking guru with regards to doing a lot of good research through his kind of his office as a both research professor at UCLA and his work through the American Planning Association. So certainly put a lot of stock in his commentary and research. A lot of good tweetable comments in here as well, and quotes. My favorite, before we leave this, where he states, parking requirements are closer to sorcery than to science. So I think that can really put a good lens on what we have to work with here moving forward. And he even included specific parking requirements, even in places that you might think are a little bit more forward-thinking with regards to parking, and how they still have outdated, antiquated codes referring to things that don't really have that much in communities anymore, such as arcades or pool halls. So they're still out there, but again, having those as your standards for, and basing parking standards around those are quite interesting. My favorite was the miniature golf and requiring 1.25 parking spaces per tee. Just, again, those are the things that you can kind of chuckle at those. I certainly do quite a bit. But again, as we start laughing at those, hopefully that is a clue that perhaps these need to be addressed and updated. Hopefully not much to chuckle at with the comprehensive plan itself. It is only 5 years old here in 2020, but I did want to bring it to your attention as well because this is something as well on the Plan Commission work program here for this year. And it's something that is, again, kind of self-identified in the comprehensive plan as needing to conduct a formal review of the plan at least once every 5 years. So that is on page 15-4 of the attachment that was provided, and I'll let Ryan scroll down to that. Thank you. Top of 15 page. There's the attachment, but continue going. Thank you. One more, I think. Nope, a couple more. One more. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Objective 3, regular reviews. So talking about formal review of the plan, every 10 years is more the full version revision of the comprehensive plan. Every 5 years is more, again, kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of midterm review of the comp plan. Again, so we included the entirety of Chapter 15, which is known as the Plan Implementation Program. This is essentially a starting point as well for your annual work plan each year that we present in January. So kind of provide some of these bits and pieces, provide an update and such, almost an ongoing annual type approach. And that's also referenced here in this chapter, kind of providing an annual report as such of the kind of progress on these items. With that, again, this chapter, as I noted in the cover memo, will serve as a guide for the next 5 years. It has for the last 5 years and will for the next 5 years. So this is the kind of back half of this will serve as pieces and parts that we'll need to update here this year. Again, just a quick summary, the previous 5-year review, which was done for the 2005 comprehensive plan. So kind of looking back to that, kind of a mix of us in terms of who was involved in that back at that point, which occurred in 2011 rather than 2010, but did occur in kind of conjunction with this 5-year review process. There was a 27-member comprehensive review group is what was referred to, and that was comprised of members of the 2005 Comprehensive Plan Citizens Advisory Committee. So there was an advisory committee for 2015 update as well, of course. So that's one thing to consider as we start moving ahead with this, is to look at what kind of input we want to provide in a more broad-based approach. Back with that last midterm review, 3 meetings were held in May and June, which was pretty aggressive timeline. But again, I know in part, again, 2010 may have been more the intended timeline, but 2011 is when it occurred. So it does not need to happen that quickly. If we're looking at kind of a more kind of formal input review process, it does not have to happen 3 meetings in 2 months. That's certainly an option, but again, that was more of kind of a quicker, structured approach. Those included, the 3 different meetings were an organizational meeting, input meeting, and a review meeting. So a little more kind of rapid fire review of the plan implementation program at that point. So revisions to what were called at that point, or that time, the plan implementation work plan, those are kind of filtered down to a 3-page list, and they're presented to the Plan Commission for approval in October. So between June and October, there's some revisions and additional input provided, but presented to the Plan Commission for their approval October of that year. As an example, I want to really highlight the importance of the 5-year review. This is not just a go through the checklist and just say done, okay, let's change a date and such. One of the goals and outcomes of that 2011 review was the adoption of the health chapter that was added to the comprehensive plan in 2013. So some of the things is kind of leading into, we talk about parking standards. Certainly that's one area that could be included in this. Affordable housing, of course. There are a lot of different things that we're already talking about through the annual work program that could certainly be more specifically and formally integrated into the comprehensive plan itself. And again, the big one even here tonight was the Renewable Energy Action Plan. So that too, and all the different parts that go with that, can certainly, again, it's being integrated into the comprehensive plan. That's something we can kind of check off the list, but we can certainly at least say, these are the things we're doing. So we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about parking, talk about renewable energy. These are things that we, in 2015, we're talking about, just kind of nibbling at the edges a little bit, but now here we're already doing that. So let's take credit for it, but at least acknowledge that these things are happening, and then put those into the comprehensive plan with this 5-year review. I neglected to mention as well, with that Renewable Energy Action Plan, kudos again to Ned and Patrick Ritchie, who is Ned's intern working on this. Every time I walked by their office, at least it looked like they were always working on this. I know it's not necessarily the case, but as you saw, there's a lot of data and just a lot of pieces to keep moving through that. Not necessarily saying that's the same kind of level that we're expecting with this comprehensive plan review, but again, that's I'll kind of end there and just get your feedback right now, but just, that's something that similarly could occur. You could have a steering committee of, broad-based group. We could focus on a number of different topics, and again, we don't have to solve all those problems, but we at least can say these are the things we want to do over the next 5 years. So rather than kind of your annual work plan, what are we going to look at for kind of 5-year work plan before we do a full revision of the comprehensive plan? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments or questions from the commission? Commissioner Christopherson.
So for my education, this probably won't make any difference over the long run, but when I asked about standards and goals for the parking study and where we want to be by 2030, it sounds like this is where that happens.
It can, yes.
This would be one of the places.
Right, exactly.
Where else do you kind of get those goal trends?
Correct. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it's, again, it doesn't necessarily need to follow the same format with, goals, objectives, priorities, action steps, but that's kind of the traditional method of, if we want to deviate entirely from this same format process of the comprehensive plan, that's fine. But I think if you look at this chapter 15, it'd be, I think, easiest and most immediately productive to utilize that format moving forward. But yeah, exactly. In terms of parking, again, I just mentioned these kind of, top of mind type things, housing, renewable energy, parking. Those are certainly things that we can establish with some specific goals and objectives in this part of the plan, while we are also still working on some of those kind of action items. They can work concurrently.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the commission?
For me, if I may, again,
Yeah.
I say the biggest thing, but the more immediate thing to think about, again, don't need a decision tonight, but thinking about that, committee or work group, or however you might envision that looking like. Again, for the last time this was done, simply took the member list from the previous comp plan 5 years prior. I don't know if Daryl went through and started calling everybody, but it was 27 people, which is quite a bit. But I think, Ned, there were over 40 on the steering committee for the READ, right? Plus or minus. So that's not completely unreasonable to think we could have a group in the 20s. But if you have some ideas and thoughts on that, we'd love to hear those. I should temper that by saying the previous 5-year review was done with the assistance of an outside consulting firm. That is not going to be the case this year. It's going to be wholly in-house. Not saying we're smarter and stronger and better than we were 10 years ago when this was last done. But financially, we've not stepped out to do that kind of approach this time around.
Commissioner Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a strong supporter of neighborhood associations, and I'd like to make sure that they are identified. One of the things I noticed when I was reading through the updates from the last time is there was no one from the Upper West Side or the West Side that was a participant in that. And I think that's true of your less engaged parts of our community. So it's hard to engage the not engaged, but I think they're holding secrets.
In a positive, productive way, correct? All right. Certainly, and that's something as well, moving forward here, too, is that the input group or steering committee, what have you, can be structured based in part on kind of the primary topics that want to be addressed as well. So, so some things may not be as relevant to certain groups simply because the topics may not be what the Plan Commission wants to really focus on here. So that's the concluding question to think about, kind of the two questions to think about moving forward. And we'll certainly keep this on the agenda kind of at least every other meeting type thing, just to get some feedback, would be some of those topics. Again, I don't want to say these are the three that we must work on, but here they are tonight. The renewable energy, parking, and we've already talked quite a bit, of course, about housing. So anything else out there as well? You have had thoughts and discussions related to parking and landscaping and things of that sort. We've talked about, Claremont Avenue with setbacks. That could turn into a corridor plan. Not saying that's exactly where we're headed, but those are thoughts that planning staff have had as well. So anything and everything is fair game at this point. Use that Chapter 15 as kind of your guidance. Use your work program as guidance. And feel free to just kind of rapid fire, email, call, or at the next meeting, share thoughts on topics and steering committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any code compliance items to discuss? Future agenda items? Been talking about them actually already. And additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, without objection, this meeting is adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689 or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.